I know your consolation is sincere, and I wish I could accept it with a better attitude, but I'm still unhappy with the outcome. Thank you, Secretary Kerry, for coming today. One of the first things or actions that I remember as you began your office was that you reinstated the 4 employees, that were involved and implicated by the review board in Benghazi. It's always, to me, been more of a concern about the decisions that were made in the 6 months in advance of Benghazi than the talking points. In fact, I think the talking points have drowned out some really important decisions we made. We're all human, so these people I'm not saying are bad people, but some really bad decisions were made in the 6 months leading up. 2 of the big ones that were made, I think, were that there was a 16-person security team led by Colonel Wood who said we wanted to stay in country, and they were not allowed to stay in country. And there was also the request for a plane. And apparently that evening, for a DC-3 that was denied earlier, maybe about 6 months before the attack, that plane would have been important. There was a struggle that evening, to get permission from the Libyans to get a plane. I think the C-30 they were trying to get on was a Libyan plane. So there really, I think, were some bad decisions made. And this doesn't make the people who made the decisions bad people, but they were bad decisions that were made. There were requests for security that were turned down. Throughout the 6 months preceding the attack on Benghazi, though, a lot of money was spent on things that I think most Americans would say are frivolous and maybe not part of the immediate mission of the State Department. I'll give you a few examples. $100,000 was spent on sending comedians to India. It was the Make Chai Not War tour. $100,000 was spent getting electrical charging station in Vienna for the ambassador so he could green up the embassy. $650,000 was spent on Facebook ads. These are all State Department expenses. $700,000 was spent on landscaping for the embassy in Brussels. $5 million was spent on crystal wine glasses and crystal glassware, barware for the State Department, for embassies. You can argue the legitimacy of these, but it's hard to argue that in the face of the disaster in Benghazi, and it's hard to argue this in the face of people who say, well, we didn't have enough money. The other criticism I think that ought to be considered with regard to Benghazi is that, and this is something I think the review board didn't adequately address, is whether or not in the midst of a country coming out of war that really the State Department should be in charge of security, whether they can adequately provide security. And I think one of the biggest mistakes in decision, these all happen, from your predecessor, not you, but the biggest mistake, I think, in Benghazi was thinking that Benghazi was more like Paris than Baghdad. And had we treated Benghazi as a fortress in the middle of a military base, I think we might have had a better chance. Nobody can predict exactly, what could happen with different outcome. But I think when we have a civil war raging, we have to consider whether or not one of the errors in decision was how we chose to protect or not protect the consulate. Why is this still important? I think it's still important because I'm concerned another attack could happen like this in other countries that are under State Department control. I know you're probably well aware of sort of the situation on the ground in Libya, but I don't know that it's perfectly stable. I'm concerned whether or not we could have another attack of this magnitude in Tripoli, at the embassy. I guess we no longer have any consulate in Benghazi, correct?
We didn't have one then, Senator.
Okay.
It was not a consulate.
Okay. We had some kind of
It was
office.
not a consulate.
Okay. But anyway, my concern is whether or not we're adequately protected, whether the State Department can adequately protect, and whether or not maybe embassies in war-torn countries or countries emerging from civil war would be better off treated more as we did the embassy in Baghdad, with a much greater military presence and a much greater military oversight of protection, and whether or not you've looked at the expenses, and if you haven't, you'll look at some of these expenses that many of us have seen in the press and are aghast that we spent $100,000 sending some comedians to India, $650,000 on Facebook ads, $700,000 on landscaping, $5 million on crystalware, that really, in the face of the Benghazi disaster, we need to reevaluate how we're spending our money at the State Department.
When did the comedians go to India? I'm curious.
I think it's all previous to your tenure. I'm not blaming this on you, but it's something.
We could use a few right now.
What's that? Yeah. No, I mean, I don't want to be frivolous about sending some comedians. I mean, really, seriously, when there's complaints we don't have enough money for security.
Senator, let me answer your question. Good question. It's legitimate. But let me dispel you of any